Welcome to the Creative Agency Success Show, the go-to resource for agency owners looking to scale their business. Join us every week to stay ahead of the curve and position your agency for future success.
Hannah, I love having you on the show. Much better than my other co-hosts. So I appreciate the insight you bring to these episodes. So good job. Did you enjoy talking with Tom today?
I did. I had a really good time talking with Tom. I don't know if I bring better insights, but I do bring better hair than Jody. So, I mean, I at least have that going for me. But no, I really did enjoy talking to Tom. I feel like he is like following digital dollars and cents by the book. And so I can appreciate like hearing his journey and just hearing somebody. I feel like we just talk about it so often because like it's what we do, it's what we know, it's what we want our clients to do. But actually hearing him talk about how he's executing that and actually living that out was really cool to hear how he's actually implemented what we know businesses should be doing. He's actually living that out.
Yeah, I was thinking that as he was talking, I was like, maybe at the next speaking event, Hannah and I shouldn't speak. We should have Tom speak for us because he was basically, yeah, like you said, by the book and really real life examples and scenarios. And so a lot of the stuff, and he's not even a client. So it was really cool to kind of see like that he's doing it as, a lot of on his own based on some of the speaking events he saw us at. So it was really cool for me to see that. And I agree 100% that he did a nice job laying that out and had a lot of really good ideas to bring to the table.
I agree. And I think he spoke a bit about EOS. I feel like I get really mixed reviews on EOS in general in terms of whenever I talk to people about it. I either get like an eye roll or like people are like, yes, all about EOS. So just hearing his like boots on the ground experience with how he's using EOS in his business was also a cool aspect to the conversation too.
Yep, definitely. So everybody enjoy the show with Tom. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's episode. This is going to be a great show. There's a lot of topics we can go down with this guest, and I'm excited to see where this goes. So excited to have Tom Conlon on from North Street. Make sure I get that right. North Street, right? That's the full name.
Yep.
So yeah, welcome to the show, Tom. Excited to have you on here, and why don't you give us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks for having me. My name is Tom Conlon. I run North Street Creative. It's been doing it for 14 years now. Actually, we're a branding and design agency, mostly focused on B2B clients. So we do a lot of stuff with financial services, institutional financial services, professional services, healthcare, and nonprofits. Usually, like it's like a company or an organization that's going through some kind of moment of change. That could be like a new CEO. Could be that like they just haven't done anything with their brand or website in 10 years. It could be that their business is shifting. They've got an investment. They've made an acquisition or whatever. And like the branding and or website need to be just kind of rethought or adapted or evolved. We're a team of 14. Before the pandemic, we were all located in New York City in the South Street Seaport. Loved it down there so much that I re-signed my 5-year lease in January 2020. Office sat empty for 2 years. And in that time, we just started hiring people outside of New York because we were like, we don't know when this is like going to end, and let's just start doing it. And so, yeah, so today we're 14 and literally all over the world. We've got most of us are in the US, but we've got some team members in Latin America, and we even have one in Madagascar, which is super interesting.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's us. And like in terms of what we do, it's like it's brand strategy and messaging. It's the look and feel. It's website execution and optimization, and then we actually do a decent amount of like marketing collateral or even like print work. So, stuff like annual reports and stuff like that.
Awesome. And so Jody is out today. He's on one of his wonderful vacations, living his best life. So of course we are joined by the upgraded Jody with Hannah Hood. So welcome to the show.
Oh,
Hannah.
Nice. All right.
Where's Hannah going to show up in a Hawaiian shirt?
I was going to say, where's the Hawaiian?
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So Tom and I do have a little bit of history. We've been to a couple of events together, which is always fun. We always get to share food together and have some drinks, and also maybe learn a few things. But Tom, why don't you tell us a little bit about let's go down the entrepreneurship path here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your entry into entrepreneurship, what brought you there, and kind of those first couple of years and how they went for you?
Yeah, mine was definitely by accident. I was on a track to. I graduated college and I had a job right out of school. I was in the magazine industry. I graduated in 2000, so that dates me, but it also gives you a good idea of like where the kind of internet was at that time. Like I started working in magazines in like 98, 99 before I graduated. And then my first couple of years in the workforce were working on the digital side of magazines. So I taught myself design, I taught myself HTML, and this stuff was like new, right? Like, I mean, I remember when I learned it, I taught myself HTML, and I remember like creating a website on my computer in the library and then going to like my friend's room and pulling it up on his computer, and I couldn't believe it. It was like, whoa, like it's not just on the hard drive, it's like everywhere. And that was like, okay, I'm doing whatever this is, internet. And so I spent a couple years in magazines, and I actually was on the digital side, but then switched over to the editorial side. For a couple of years I was a writer editor, so I sort of did both, where I was like a designer developer, then switched over to the content side, which was fun. I mean, I worked at a men's magazine called FHM, which was like, I essentially spent an extra 5 years in college, like working in a frat house, which was really fun and interesting.
Some people, that's their dream. So, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I was the target market. It was like an 18 to 34-year-old was our target. So like I was the target. I was interviewing like skateboarders that were heroes of mine, like musicians and stuff like that. When I got out of, 06, '07, the magazine industry really started to collapse. And that was when I kind of found myself on my own. And I was doing some freelance writing, but I also, people started coming up to me and being like, "Hey, didn't you used to do websites and logos?" And I was like, "Yeah." And so I started taking on these projects, and I found very quickly that was the way to make a living, and being a freelance writer was not, because it was grueling. It was thankless. You would do a lot of work for very little money, and that's even if someone answered your email pitches, right? Whereas I started doing the math, and it's like, oh, I can do a logo in a week, and like I get paid for it, and okay. So that was really like the start of me being like, okay, I'm not like a writer anymore. I'm a website design branding person, and within a couple of years, I mean, that was like '06, '07. And then all of a sudden, I reached another moment where I was starting to get busy. And I was also starting to get people asking me for things that were definitely like above my pay grade, right? Like I was a serviceable designer and developer. I could do it, but I couldn't blow myself away even, right? And so I remember people asking me for things, and I was like, I just reached this moment where I was like, okay, I'm either going to be a career freelancer, which there's nothing wrong with this, although this was way before the gig economy. Um, there's nothing wrong with that. Or maybe I will actually start thinking beyond myself, right? And maybe I can actually run these projects, but not do every piece of it. And that's when I started kind of bringing in, like very like a developer who was like really good at like PHP or something like that, or a designer who was just like amazing at whatever. And that was really the start of my company. I mean, at first it was just me and a couple freelancers, and then in 2010, I linked up with another designer who was more of like a print branding person, and we started North Street, and that just became like, so that I sort of repped the digital web side, and she repped the more like branding, print kind of side. And so together we kind of had this full offering, and it was just the two of us for a while. And I'll kind of pause there because that's like kind of how it became a company. But then obviously, like that was
a lot of places to go.
That was a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you've been in business long enough to have seen multiple seasons. Like clearly
Yeah.
you started like right after 2008, all of
Yeah.
that. You've survived COVID. So along the way, I'd love to hear from you, just because we have a lot of creative agency owners that listen to this, just lessons learned. Like if you could go tell yourself something back whenever you first started, what would that be?
I think the thing that I'm actually even realizing now, 14 years in, I think I'm able to have seen a few cycles, and so just that it's cyclical, right? Like I've been around long enough to see the moments where it seems like, oh, all of these companies are bringing all of their creative and marketing in house, so that's like bad news for us. And then I've seen the other side of it where it's like, oh, they're getting rid of everybody, and they really want to leverage contractors or partners. And it's funny, even like my own business has gone through that, where I've like staffed up with full-time people, and then I've also like kind of contracted and worked more with worked more with like contractors and freelancers. So I think that first one is just like, okay, just be aware that it's like it's cyclical, and also like nothing's forever, I think, is a big one too. And that's a pretty broad statement, but that's like, look, anybody that's like working for you today, any client that you have today, like nothing's forever. Things change. And it's not even, it may not even be a relationship thing. It may just be like their company, your biggest client may get acquired by a giant company and they have to cut you out. And it's like, it just is what it is. And there's definitely some financial stuff. I mean, I didn't even have a line of credit until COVID. I didn't even like know what it was. I mean, I knew what it was, but like, I just, I just thought it was for like bigger companies. And so, when like COVID started happening and I was like, oh my God, I need a PPP. And I was like, well, it's crazy. Actually, my story is crazy. I used to, I was a Bank of America customer, but I was talking to Bank Rhode Island because we have an office in Providence, very small bank. And I was talking to them about getting a line of credit. And right then, like that was right before COVID. And like then when COVID happened and PPP came out, I was trying to get my PPP through Bank of America, and Bank RI was like, "Hey, because you're already like we're talking to you about this like line of credit, we're gonna like include you in our portfolio of companies that we're getting PPP for." So I was like, "Oh my God!" So lesson right there, which I actually have learned in a couple places, and I might have learned this from you guys in one of your presentations, was like having a relationship, having a relationship with a small bank. Um, Means the person, right? You know the person that you can call when you need something versus, an 800 number like at a bigger bank. Um, so those are just a few, but like, I mean, I've learned hundreds of lessons and I have the battle scars to prove it. So we can kind of take this anywhere.
Yeah, it's really funny. Like we preached the banking relationship for a long time. It's something we always spoke about. Something we always talked about. It didn't necessarily need to be with a small bank. It was just make sure you have a
Mhm.
relationship with your bank. It can't be a
A person.
it
Yep,
can't be a different 1-800 number you're calling all the time. And PPP
exactly.
like really drove that home for everybody we worked with. After
Oh
PPP, people
man.
are like, "Oh, I get it now. I know why you guys said that," because all of our clients had. I think we were in the first round. I think we were like 95% of our clients getting PPP because of the banking relationships that were there, and that was something early we learned. But
Totally. It really was. It really was. Like it was for me too, because I'd been hearing it, right?
yeah,
But I never didn't. And then I'm like, oh my God, this is real.
for sure. Yeah. So you talked about the cycles of business, and we see that all the time. And I think right now a lot of companies are kind of on that low cycle, or they're coming out of that low cycle. So let's talk a little bit about that and how did you survive those low cycles, and what are some of the tips where you're like, okay, things are tougher than we're used to. What are the things you can do to kind of get through those patches so you're ready for the next high cycle?
Yeah, I mean, some of it's really tough. Some of it's making a lot of tough decisions. I will say that, I'll be pretty candid and say that in 2022, I think it was, 2023 maybe, we hit a real down cycle, and but 2021 was was the end of a very high cycle.
Hmm.
So I had a lot of staff. I had like 16 people, and I held on to those folks for too long. You know what I mean? I really tried my darndest to like, was like hoping that like the business would come in to support that amount of staff. And I'd say that I held on to them too long to the point where I actually put the business in real danger. So like, I think one thing is like, look, you got to make the tough decisions like early, like not too early, like don't freak out. And like, I know people that like actually with COVID, it was like, people I knew, they were like, "Oh, I'm just like wiping out 30% of my staff just because," and it was like, "Whoa, like we don't even know what's happening." I kind of was the opposite, where I was like, like I I don't want to lose these people," and so that was a real lesson, like just making sure that like you make the hard decisions and you make them in a timely manner. I think what we just talked about, kind of that I kind of mentioned very briefly, was. What we're kind of doing now, we're in one of those cycles where we're trying to concentrate, um, sort of like, I guess I say like strategy and kind of like project management are that infrastructure. Like we're trying to keep that internal, but we're being more flexible in terms of like, well, our dev staff is internal, but we are able to flex up to more devs faster. We're able to flex up to more designers faster. Because what that means is like, we've got relationships with these people, but they're not on payroll. And so, as long as we can give them a proper heads up and they can give us a proper heads up, we can sort of dial that up and down. And so I'm thankful to be in that phase right now, as we are in a bit of a down cycle right now. And so it's nice to be able to be like, okay, well, I don't have to like fire a third of my staff. I can just sort of
Mhm.
dial these folks down and then hopefully dial them back up when we return. The other thing is what I mentioned before is like having a line of credit. My God, if I didn't have
Safety net.
that like
Yep.
through COVID, whoa. And then finally, yeah, safety net, like having some savings in the bank. So we really, again, I'm being fairly like transparent here. Like we burned through our savings and our lines back in 2022, 23 when I had to let go of the staff. And that's scary to kind of get down to like the end
Hmm.
of
For
your
sure.
of the money that you have. We've rebuilt, like we've rebuilt. We like actually paid off our lines completely, and we have a decent amount of savings. I'd say we have like probably between our lines and savings, we probably have 4 to 6 months of operating capital. So um, just having a safety net, is another thing that I think is important as you go into down cycles.
Tom's out here just reiterating the stuff that we preach.
I know.
Like, I love it. I'm like, we could just take this little clip right here. It'd be so perfect.
I'm reading from my copy of Dollars and Cents by Jerry Brennan.
I figured. I figured. Well, you saying that though, just about the cyclical nature and just the change that happens. First of all, just know like you're not alone. Like we see
Yeah,
this all the time, like with our clients in terms of just waiting too long to make those decisions because they can be just really emotional. So it's part of
yeah,
what we talk about is just talking through those scenarios and walking those out before you actually have to until you get down to the end of that
yes,
savings. And, then it's just,
yes,
I'm sure that was an extremely emotional time for you to
yeah.
have gone through that. Has it changed how you prepare now since we've identified, okay, yes, this is cyclical. Odds are you might have to go through that again in the future.
Hmm.
Like, has that
Hmm.
shaped how you prepare now for the future at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have sort of like scenarios, right? I mean, um, we have projections, and we can talk about this if we have time too, because like I'm mostly a project business, so projections are like a nightmare. But we do them, and we sort of have like worst case scenario, and we have contingency plans if we have those. And it's you know what it is. It sort of makes it less of a scary conversation because it's on the table, and we're just like, hey, look, like we're heading into a down cycle. We don't know how long this is going to last, and if we have to, like pull back, here are the expenses that we would pull back on. Here's the sort of contractors we would dial down if we had any kind of staff that we had to let go. This is who it would be. But it's like it's these sort of like we're not waiting until the last minute, right?
Great. Yeah. So you kind of talked quite a bit there about having the plans in place, and this is something we work with on every one of our clients. And the first part of it is having a forecast, right? So again,
Yeah,
I talk about this a lot, but a forecast versus a budget. If you have a budget, you're looking at it once a year. If you have a forecast, you're
right,
looking at it every
right.
month. And so you want to be able to tag into that forecast, jump into that forecast at any time, and do exactly what you talked about, a scenario build, and take the
Yeah,
emotion out of those decisions. Because if you're at the point where you're having to lay people off, the last thing you want to be doing is making those decisions emotionally and being like, oh man, I really don't want to let this person go. But if you've already made those
absolutely.
decisions, and when we hit this amount of profitability, when we hit this amount of cash, this is what's happening. It just takes it out of it a little bit. And I also
Hmm.
loved what you said earlier about having the flexibility. I think that really helps you makes you have a couple levels of decisions you're allowed to make before you have to start laying people off. So you have the contractors you can flex back. You have all these things you
Exactly,
can do
exactly.
prior to that. So that's one of the things that I thought was nice that you said you have that flexibility.
Yeah, yeah. It's. I mean, I'm definitely in a better spot than I was a year and a half ago or wherever because we did that. It was very emotional. Like had real no plans and like just kind of waited, and then it was like, oh my god, like what are we gonna do?
Um, yeah, so I guess I would ask too, for your team, like how did they fare? Because I feel like leadership at the top through tough times like also matters a lot in terms of your culture. Like, so was your culture affected in these times? Like, how did that affect you? Like, and how do you lead? Do you lead differently now having gone through that?
Yeah, I I do. It was really hard on culture. In fact, one of the people we had to let go was sort of like our culture person. We were a small team, and like we had brought this person on as a We brought them on. Honestly, we brought them on. It was one of those people. They were an A player, but just without a position, if that makes sense, right? Like they had been introduced to me from a friend, um, and I was like, I think I can use this person as a project manager. They look like they would be a delight to have in my organization. So brought him on. Um, Tried him with project management. It wasn't really his forte. And so his role kind of evolved into like a little bit of like a human resources culture kind of team advocate thing. But for a team of 16, that was an expensive like luxury to have. But it was great, right? I mean, our culture was like peaking. We were doing all sorts of like, and this was virtual too. So we were doing all sorts of stuff, like having like, I don't know. It was very, it was a very, very high priority. And perhaps too high of a priority, like for the reality of the financials at that time, right? And so yeah, we definitely took a culture hit. And so when we when we let a bunch of people go, we were really in like batten down the hatches mode. And so it was really just like, let's power through. Like culture has to take a back seat right now because we have to power through. It wasn't like, hey, don't talk to me. It was like we were still like having dialogue and like laughs and fun and stuff, but it wasn't as just like purposeful as it had been before. My COO, who I actually brought on after I brought him in like right before we had to let people go. Um, he put it a good way. He says like, essentially we were basically flying the airplane and like taking off parts of the airplane like as we're flying, hoping that the thing still flies. And what we discovered was it flies, but it's shaky, right? And so now that we're like back and we're profitable and our savings is built back up, we're sort of adding the pieces back in, and some of the pieces are different, right? Like, but some of the pieces are the ones that we took out, and so we have started layering culture back in a purposeful way. And so yeah, it's just one of those things where we literally had to like focus on making making money to pay back debt and get ourselves in a profitable place before we could like start to refocus on the fun stuff.
So I'm gonna slight pivot for the last part of this interview, and so this is just a slight pivot. So you mentioned earlier that you're, or not earlier in this interview, but when we talked earlier, that you're a big EOS guy. So I think
Yeah,
all the stuff we've talked about, having an operating system has probably really helped you in a lot of those methods. So can you talk not specifically about EOS, but what having that
sure.
that system in place has helped you with these decisions and how you operate, and kind of how it's been there for you along the way.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about EOS or just other systems, especially with creative agencies, is that like creative I've we felt this way, and I've talked to other creative agencies where they're like, "What? Like that's like a template? You're basically talking about using like a template for business, which is like creative person's like kryptonite, right? You're like, why would you? It just sounds so formulaic and like, but what I said to my team, and I've said to like other people, I've said this to our EOS implementer. It's like, wait, like why get creative about how to run running a business is like there's like the nuts and bolts of like, just financial health and responsibility, and like why get creative or like go crazy with that? Like, no, this should be the stuff that's like built in and like it should be templatized. And so just having that, and when I say templatized, I mean it's a system, right? It's a system
Yep.
that's like other businesses are using with success. Okay, so let's use it. And I think EOS specifically, I think the biggest thing was the weekly meetings. Really like this 90-minute meeting where you're not. I mean, prior to that, we would just jump on meetings and we'd just jump in and we'd start talking about just projects, and then the meeting would end and we'd be like, what's the next step? Oh, the next step's like another meeting to basically talk about all the things that we just talked about, but this time like write it down. And the EOS system, and I'm sure all the others are very like, let's use this meeting to focus on the bigger picture issues that are in front of us this week or this quarter, not the project related deadline stuff. But most importantly, those meetings end with like who, what, when, right? Like what's the next step? Who's going to do it? And when are they going to do it by? And that alone was like a huge, just like change to our company, because even meetings that weren't that like prescribed weekly meeting as part of the system, every meeting now ends with like okay, like who, what, and when, like we can't just have this meeting end and be like, okay, bye. Uh, it's like, okay, well, who's doing it? What is the next step and who's doing it? Um, and then I'd say, setting the EOS system, and I'm sure the others are like this too. Again, it's about setting larger goals and then breaking those up into bite-sized pieces that you can work on a weekly basis, then a quarterly basis, and then and then they all roll up to like the annual. And so, for me, it's just been a really great way to kind of step back and work on the business instead of in the business. And to really get people like the team just kind of aligned on like, what we do, why we exist, who we do it for, how we do things here. And like what your place is in the company and like what you can do to sort of change your station at the company,
Yeah, we just
Yeah.
got back from our leadership meeting last week, and so it's something funny. Hannah and I talk about it all the time. Is what I love about EOS or any type of operating system is we're allowed to look back every 12 months and look at what we've achieved, and you can just look at your
Yeah.
rocks and be like, hey, look at the 14 rocks that we've accomplished this year, and like where we were a
Yeah.
year ago, we're better because these rocks are in place or these goals are now in operation. So yeah, it's something Hannah and I talk about all the time. We
Yeah.
just had our meeting last week, so walking away with some good stuff there.
Yeah. I do think, honestly, I do think EOS and these other systems are great, but I do think you also need like the financial consulting piece, because it's like it's all just dreams
Yep.
and big aspirations, but if it's not backed by like what is
Measurement.
possible, measurement and improvement, then it's all just dreams, right? And so I think coupling a system with really good just financial, like sort of visibility on your financials currently, in the past, and in the future is like the dynamic combination.
I feel like sometimes I go into because I sit as CFO for some of my clients, and there's been times I've sat in on their leadership meetings. In fact, I've gone in person to some, and I feel like sometimes I'm the wet blanket in the room of
Totally.
like, with owners. They have these grandiose
Absolutely.
thoughts and visions and ideas, and I'm like, time
Yeah.
out. Like I gotta just make us pause here and like let's look at what the numbers tell us. Is that
That's
really possible?
that's amazing. Like that's exactly what I'm talking about, though, right? Because you don't want to walk out with these rocks that are like, "Hey, we're gonna quadruple in size," and it's like, okay, but like, what if that happened?
Right.
Or how are you going to do that? So, yeah,
Yes.
agree.
Exactly.
All right.
So do you get your team super involved in your rocks? I have this thought that I hadn't even ran by Jamie yet. That's just an idea about like how to get the team involved in rocks. But do you like spread that broadly like throughout your team, or is it just within your leadership team?
Yeah, we do. I mean, everybody has rocks. Sometimes they roll up to like a larger company rock, but sometimes sometimes it's just like self development, right? Or like career development. It's like, hey, look, like we're kind of interested in um, this new CMS. Like, why don't we have one of our developers like play around over the next quarter, and then at the end sort of report to us like, is this a viable thing for us? So, it's not really like that doesn't really ladder up to like a big company rock, but it is something that improves that person's like technical skills and is a little bit of R&D for us. So yeah, we like to have everybody have a rock.
Yeah, that's
Very
great.
excited to hear about your idea, Hannah. So we can. I'm
Yeah.
excited for our next meeting. But yeah,
Well,
let's
you have
let's move on to the fun topic. So early on, you mentioned your background in magazines, and this question might be a little tougher for Hannah because I know she's a little younger than both of us. So but I want to hear your story about what magazines or long form media articles that you've read that are really motivational for you or inspirational for you, or just a magazine that you really grew up on. I'm really interested for your answer on this one, Tom, because it sounds like you had a lot of experience in this industry.
I grew up on Thrasher magazine, so that was
Okay.
like my Bible as a kid. I was like a skater, and it was like it was awesome. It was sort of like even the ads in Thrasher were cool because they were like skaters, like and like doing cool moves, and it was like, oh, that's a cool sneaker or a cool skateboard. But it also covered music. I learned about a ton of bands through Thrasher magazine. Um, And it was just, I don't know, it was just one of those things. It's one of those, like, it makes me sad that magazines aren't really, as big as they used to be, because that was like a highlight for me. I would just go and like the new issue would be out and I'd be like, oh my God, I'm gonna like discover new bands and like
Yep.
and all that. As I got older, I started working in magazines. I started liking magazines like Wired and Popular Science, Popular Mechanics. I actually wrote for all of those, but like those were just like the magazines that I was really interested in. And now in terms of what I read now in terms of long form, I'm a big consumer of audiobooks. So I listen to I listen to sort of two categories of audiobooks. One is like business books, like the stuff we're talking about now, anything written in the EOS library, like those big books that come around. They're like, you have to read this, and also the classics like Good to Great and all those, right? But I also read a lot of nonfiction. For some reason, I'm really into financial, like crime, or like, like the sort of smartest guys in the room, the Enron thing, the Big Short. Like I'm reading this like huge book right now on the history of Wall Street. I say it like that, even though I'm listening to it on Audible for some reason.
I do the same thing.
It's that big. I don't know. Is that like the time bar, right? So like that's what I'm consuming in terms of my media.
There was a book, and I can't remember the name of it. And since you're reading the financial books, I think it was written by the same guy that wrote Moneyball, about like how traders have such an advantage now because they can trade so fast, and they can.
Yes.
If I can remember the name of it, I'll put it in the show notes.
I think it's called Flash Boys.
Yeah, Flash Boys. Yep, that's it. Yeah, that one was fascinating. Yeah. That was a really.
I actually haven't read that one. That's a good one. He also wrote he wrote the recent one on Sam Bankman-Fried and that whole thing, which was interesting. Nice. Yeah, Michael. I can't remember his
Michael
name.
Lewis, right?
Yeah.
Well, boys, I learned we are not the same, because that is not what I'm listening to on Audible.
But first question, did you have magazines you read growing up, or are you?
Yes, I did. Okay. I'm not that young.
Yes, well, you do the Young CPA podcast, so I have to just assume that like magazines are outside of you.
I guess I'll hold on to that for as long as I can.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I have this affection for pop culture. So we always had a subscription to People magazine. So I grew up reading People magazine. I currently still get Vogue. Somebody like it was not me. I did not subscribe to this magazine, but I get a copy of Vogue every month, and I'm not mad about it though. So I really enjoy it. Yeah, so I did, but it was more like pop culture. My grandparents would always get us a subscription to the Smithsonian, so I did read that a lot. So I do love just that like hard copy, having something in your hands. Like I love an audiobook, but I'm still like, I like having that tangible piece of print in your hand to read.
Well, something exciting about it coming in the mail too. Like we always had the subscription to Sports Illustrated, and that's definitely what I was originally raised on. It was reading Sports Illustrated, and I was always really excited for like the season previews. Where it was okay, the NBA season's getting ready to start. Now they're going to do a write up on Larry Bird that I can dive into, or NFL, whoever, and I could just dive into an article just about a person and their life and all their basketball habits they had. But as I got older, I definitely got more into like the Rolling Stones and outdoor magazines, and like those are ones that my parents never had subscriptions to. So whenever I like was at the airport or traveling or at a newsstand, I'd always just have to buy those and grab them. And I remember like, oh, Pearl Jam's on the cover of Rolling Stones. I'm gonna Dad, drive me to here so I can go buy it. And just reading those articles were always fun for me.
When I was a kid, I used to actually get my dad for Christmas every year. I would get him like the Year in Rock, like double issue of Rolling Stone. I got him a magazine, a single issue. No, it's like somebody wanted, but I remember that vividly. Like it was always this like big end of the year issue.
Well, Rolling Stones was always like twice the size of any magazine too, so it was always a fun one to buy because it was just bigger pages. Yeah. But no, that was definitely one that I read. So awesome. So definitely a fun episode here. Appreciate it. As our listeners might be able to tell, my internet froze a ton during this interview, so there might be some wacky edits on this one. But appreciate you guys putting up with it. And I think this was a fun show, and definitely I learned a lot about you and your business, Tom, and kind of the path you've gone down. So thanks for sharing that with everybody.
Cool. It was awesome to talk to you guys.
Yep. Sweet. Thank you.
Thanks.
Enjoy this podcast? Visit our website, summitcpa.net, to get more tips and strategy for achieving business success. We're here to be a resource in this ever-changing industry.